I will tell you plainly and I will tell you slow because the truth deserves the cadence of a measured heart. My name is Josephine Rivera. I am 79 years old. I can still thread a needle without peering because I have been stitching my days together for longer than most people have been alive. Hems, mends, little repairs that make a life not collapse. I have a kettle with a chip on its rim, a porch swing that hates sudden weather, a photograph on the mantle with a boy of 10 grinning with jam on his chin. That boy grew into a man my hands taught how to tie a knot and my voice taught to say please and thank you. He also learned how to build a future with somebody else's silence as cement. That is the part I will tell you about now. It begins, as so many betrayals do, in a room with too much light. I was ironing a shirt for choir, Sunday. Because habit is a kind of worship and I had been singing in that small church since my teeth were new. The iron hissed a soft scolding. Steam lifted like a small prayer. I had eaten nothing all morning for the fast, because there was a hunger in my throat that felt like devotion. Then the world tipped. 1 minute the sleeve was smooth beneath my hand. The next minute the ceiling was fluorescent and the floor smelled of disinfectant and the nurse with the good smile was telling me about low blood sugar. Like that was explanation enough. I wanted juice. They gave me an IV in a room and a privacy curtain that smells like other people's shampoo and worry. He came then, my son, Mateo, who used to build towers of tin cans and make a drum from an old coffee can and insist it was music. There is a way a mother recognizes a child's walk, no matter how the years have ironed themselves into the soles. He kissed my forehead and said, "Ma," in a voice that had learned to smooth edges. He held my hand as if the hand he held was still the small one that needed guidance. Behind him stood a woman whose name I came to know like a chill Vanessa, whose perfume smelled like a catalog and whose smile was the same whether asking for a discount or a favor. At first he looked like the child who would step into puddles if you put bright socks on him. He asked questions, stroked the back of my hand. But there was always that lift of his chin when he talked to the nurses as if they were colleagues. He leaned toward the chart more than toward me. He said things in whispers beyond the curtain. His wife spoke on the phone in the hallway with the business patience of someone ordering curtains. "We should consider the home placement," she murmured once, like the words were soft shawls. "She's been repeating herself." I sat up and told them who the president was. I told them the name of the street outside my kitchen. I told them, apparently as firmly as a sheet of paper, that I was fine. The nurse wrote something down anyway, and the letters looked like a verdict. That first night, questions came in blue ink folded into the mouths of strangers. Do you know where you are? What year is it? Who is the president? The questions were not because the staff doubted me. They were because someone had painted a scenario and then began filling it in the power of attorney. The call to a caseworker. Whispers about decline in tones that sound like mercy but are tidy little excuses for appropriation. I had been at the altar of my own life, and they were rehearsing the eulogy. There is a sound in a hospital when people are arranging things for a body they think is almost gone. The rustle of catalogs, the discreet clearing of throats, the clicking of color swatches. I heard Vanessa say, "Lilies are sweet but predictable. Orchids feel more premium." Mateo's voice was low, concerned, as if he were playing the part of son while someone else flipped pages. They thought because people can be so blind when they want to be that I could not hear. I could. My ears kept the world for me when my limbs hesitated. A heart is stubborn like a drum. It beats even when the room wants to fold you into a rumor. I remember the smell of that place most. Lemon cleaner and the ghost scent of hospital soap, the metallic of the forestand. I remember the way light came from high windows in bars. I remember the janitor's mop wheel squeak, steady as a metronome. And I remember overhearing Vanessa ask the funeral director phoned from a pocket, his quiet voice agreeing to reserve the church's reception hall for August. "Just in case," she said, all practicality and towels. The just in case leaned like a shovel. It dug. They were turning me into a plan. There are small mercies when you are near being stripped of your armaments. A nurse named Patrice, middle-aged, tired of lying to the world, with her hair in a practical knot, paused in the doorway, fingers around a syringe. She looked at me the way a woman looks at her sister at a funeral, and then sets the needle down. She sat and squeezed my hand. "You're not ready," she told me in a voice shaped like a church hymn. That squeeze held more power than the legal offices I couldn't name yet. "Hold on," she seemed to say. "Don't let them close the book while you're still writing. Some of the best weapons are ordinary." I asked Patrice to call Simone my lawyer, a woman who never fumbled. I said her name and felt the sound like a raft tossed into fast water. Simone arrived with the exactness of a woman who knows stamps and schedules and the way men shrink when a woman hands them a cease. She spoke to administrators with an authority that made my son falter like someone who hadn't been rehearsing for this scene. She produced documents, dated and notarized. Papers that had been signed months earlier when we thought we were protecting our home, not defending a heart. Simone read the hospital chart, watched the emails, patted a folder and said, "Not on my watch." If I had been a river, Simone was a levee. She kept the banks. She took the papers from hungry hands and turned them into proof that I still had ownership of myself. The forged forms Matteo had pulled like a magician's trick were exposed. A power of attorney signed in a hand that was close to mine but not mine. A claim to authority that smelled of convenience and greed. Simone's mouth formed the words. Elder abuse, fraud, coercion. They sound like cold things until you hear them uttered against your own child. Then they are knives you did not know you needed to bandage. Elijah, my grandson. Part of me, like a seed in the palm of my hand, came the way brave children do, slipping in after hours with the check, the quiet evidence. He had seen texts and voice notes and emails I never knew were about me. He had printed them and wrapped them in courage. He sat by my bed and squeezed until Bones remembered. "Grandma," he whispered. I forwarded all the things to Simone. That boy's small hands, big eyes had become the anchor no legal paper could replace. We rewrote everything. I sat at a table with Simone and a pen, and clauses like little fences we built around my life. I removed Matteo from lines that used to have his name. I placed notices, contingency clauses like tripwires. If anything suspicious happened, the estate would be placed in trust under Elijah, with Simone the executor. I made the women's shelter the primary beneficiary because I have sewn patches on the coats of women who needed to start again, because my house, in hands that respect it, can be more useful than a locked-up sorrow. I learned lawyers are not just for the guilty and the brave, they are scaffolding for those of us who still have living to do. They sent a note afterward. Matteo's handwriting sloppy, defensive, arrived on certified mail like a child's excuse. "Mama, we didn't mean to," it began, the script trying to smear itself into something that would be forgiven. I read it twice and then laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was thin. He had not known the depth of the plan he had been nesting in, or he had known and chosen to look away. That is where the real pain slept, the knowing and the turning of a face. When I returned home, the house smelled different. Someone had wiped surfaces with an efficiency that meant a new ruler had walked the rooms. New curtains hung where the old ones had sagged. My dining table, the one whose scars were a map of family meals and whispered plans, had been swapped for glass that looked too clean to hold stories. There was a suitcase half full on the guest bed like a placeholder for eviction. The jewelry box sat open, as if someone had wanted to see what was inside and decide whether they deserved any of it. I did not explode. My silence was a kind of hammer. Simone set down a recorder and a stack of the new legal papers. Elijah sat with the weight of what he had witnessed like a man who keeps his face steady because someone else must be protected. We did not call Matteo or Vanessa. We waited. Strategy sometimes looks a lot like patience. It also looks a lot like a woman putting on her Sunday dress for battle, smoothing the fabric like an armor plate. I smoothed that dress until the seams felt secure. Then they came. The doorbell rang like a bell that had been primed. I opened the door, and there they were, Matteo with a folder, Vanessa with a smile fixed as if she had rehearsed it in a mirror. Her heels clicked like punctuation. Matteo's voice carried concern the way a wind carries leaves, gentle, capable of being swept aside. He tried warmth. She tried innocence. I stood in my doorway and let them look at the house that had raised him and the woman who had once had his small hand. I did not invite them in. "You're concerned because the hospital discharged me without warning?" I asked. The words left my mouth even. "Or, are you concerned because I left before you could finish?" I said the last word slow, like a promise. Vanessa's smile fractured. Matteo reached out one hand, and I let it fall like all the other things that had tried to take me. Simone stepped into the doorway with the perfect calm of a person who knows the law and knows when to use a spine. "Everything you submitted was fraudulent," she said plainly. "If you proceed, you will find yourself facing charges." It was as if his body learned to fold. He looked smaller suddenly, like the boy who used to hide under the table when storms were loud. For a fraction of a second, shame flickered, then fell away like a curtain. They left in separate ways. Vanessa left with the same purse and now a smaller step. Matteo lingered by the gate like a man feeling the loss of the map he had been following. He did not speak. He would speak later, in other languages, apologies, excuses, court filings. I watched them go and then I closed the door gently because the neighbors were already peeking through their blinds. Elijah came to my side and I told him, "You were brave." He exhaled like the child who had held his breath since that doorbell. They were going to take everything, he whispered. I nodded. Even you, I said. He squeezed my fingers and held on. There is an intimacy in being held by those who remain. We ate that night on my mother's china. The plates with the tiny crack I have never known how to mend. We didn't talk about the mechanics of trusts or the judge's likely mood. We ate with the slow hunger of people who have been given a second chance to taste their own food. Simone stayed for supper. Amelia, another nurse who had become a friend at the fringe of the hospital's days, dropped by with a pie. Small gestures stack into a life. I found a box in the guest closet later with the word slideshow in Vanessa's handwriting. Inside were photos of me over years I had forgotten I had lived. My wedding hair a cloud of courage. Matteo with a graduation cap that looked too big. Me in a dress that held a secret pocket where perhaps my first coin had been hidden. Taped to the lid of the box was a USB drive. I plugged it into the laptop because what harm is there in curiosity when you have already been threatened? A title came up on the screen. In loving memory, Delilah Mayfield. The music started. The slide of sepia images and captions written by someone else's idea of me. Beloved matriarch, faithful to the end. The words felt like someone else arranging my biography without my consent. There is a peculiar small violence when your own life is put on replay without your permission, when someone else selects the music and calls it tribute. I closed the laptop softly and walked to the porch. The night smelled like cut grass and jasmine. I rocked and let the summer air lay a shawl around my shoulders. I knew then this story was not finished. It was only starting to be told in several keys at once. The key of legal papers. The key of family voices. The key of a grandmother's simple insistence to remain. Time, like a good neighbor, moves slow in the aftermath. Matteo did not come for a while. Perhaps he was learning to sleep without his wife's scripts. Perhaps he was listening to the hollow of his own choices. When he returned, it was without Vanessa. He stood at my gate in a suit that looked borrowed and tired. He placed a folder on my table. Not filled with legal documents, but with photographs, real photographs, not the polished ones Vanessa had selected. There he was, younger, face freckled with sunlight, pushing a bicycle with patched tires. There we were at a fair. Two faces caught in a candid laugh. He sank to the chair, like the child who has come to ask permission to be seen again. I've been to a counselor, he said. He said it like a man confessing. Elijah told me to come. His voice was uneven. I felt the tremor of a man who has had to look at himself and not liked what he saw. He told me how Vanessa had shaped his hearing, how certain words had become commands. He told me the ones I used to be that he missed. I listened as I had always listened, with a patience practiced over decades. I let his confession land like pebbles in a shallow bowl, and watched the ripples. He knelt at my feet the way he had as a little boy when he feared he had broken something and begged my pardon. I am sorry, he said. Not for everything, perhaps. But those are the first pliable bricks in the building of repair. I did not leap into forgiveness like a child into a pool. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It is a slow garden cultivated one day at a time. I placed my palm on his head. I will not let you live in my house like a ghost of your own making, I said, and I will not pretend your choices didn't cause harm. It is a strange feeling to offer both shelter and boundary at once, but it is the kind of love that keeps someone alive without letting them hollow you out again. There were small victories. Simone sealed documents and filed trusts and made sure the papers said what the house always did. Delilah Mayfield, owner. Vanessa's attempts to be named vanished like a candle snuffed. The house remained mine. The keys remained in my hands. And a secondary trust sat ready for Elijah in case darkness slid under the door again. Elise, the nurse who had once smoothed her apron like she wished she had courage, came back to visit and said she had been afraid at first, and then ashamed for her fear. She stayed and planted a little herb pot on my windowsill.days, smoothed into a pattern of soups and soap and small solidities. Elijah came after school and did homework at my kitchen table. Sometimes he would braid my hair the way a child will braid a grandmother's gray without thinking. Attentive and clumsy and exact in that way only young hands can be. We would watch a little TV with the volume down, letting news anchors argue while the kettle sang. I had not known how much I needed the rhythm of ordinary until ordinary was no longer threatened. Asterisk. People ask me sometimes if I forgave Matteo. I do not answer in a way that pleases them. Because forgiveness is a private weather. Sometimes it rains. Sometimes it does not. I water the tentative plants of it. I allow him to come near, but I no longer leave the door unlocked. Love is not a surrender. It is a careful tending. He comes with a willingness to be small and to wait at the step while rebuilding. He does not have the right to the whole of me against some parts of me, or Nozel forever. But he has space at my table for that which he earns. There is a strange kind of revenge I keep, one that is not about spectacle. It is simple and old. I kept my life. I kept my dignity. I refused to be taken and catalogued while I was still living. The law did some of the heavy lifting, and so did good friends. But mostly, it was the small action of waking up and walking to my own kitchen and placing my mug in the same spot as always. It was the refusal to let my days be decided by the whisper of "Will she please sign here?" It was the act of turning the key in my own lock and handing the script back to myself. When night comes now, I sit on my porch and listen to the neighborhood breathe. The swing creaks, the jasmine drops its head and leans into the cool. I think about the boy who once clung to my skirt at a bus stop. The man who once allowed his wife to lay out a funeral before his mother had taken her first breath after discharge. I think of the child who gave me the printouts and hid with courage. I think of the friend who called in the lawyer, and the nurse who set down the syringe. I think of the music that played on a computer, proclaiming my end without my consent. And then I think of the way the music was stopped by an ordinary hand that asked for the truth. There are nights when anger shows itself like a bitter star. There are nights when I think, if I had been softer, perhaps I would not have been harmed. If I had been sterner, perhaps I would have kept him from stepping where he did. Those are the murmurs of a mind that tries to blame itself. I do not let them live long in me. I remind myself of how many times I took a child to the doctor and stayed awake with a fever. How many nights I mended clothing by a lamp so his school uniform looked whole for Monday. Those facts keep my feet on the floor. This story is not mine to hoard. It belongs to whoever needs the map. If someone listens in a kitchen at midnight and hears the telephone ring and thinks of not answering because the voice at the other end is a child who claims to know best, let them answer with a pen. Keep your papers. Keep a friend who knows computers. Keep a lawyer who will hold the line when the world tries to sign you away. The smallest items of paperwork are sometimes the strongest armor. Time has a way of softening edges but not erasing scars. The days have gentler rhythms now. The coffee is still bitter. The roses still surprise me with their stubbornness. Mateo shows up sometimes with a folded photograph or with a plate half empty as an offering. He does not ask to take back everything. He asks only to show up and be counted. He is learning to measure the weight of apology by the steadiness of action rather than the loudness of words. It is a slow homework. I grade him with the kind of mercy that is honest. When I lie down at night and draw the blanket up, I sometimes hear the hospital again, the hum of air, the soft clatter of carts, the murmur of clinical voices. But then I reach for my bedside lamp and feel the warmth of the pull chain, and the memory recedes like tide. I think of my mother's hands. The way she used to knead bread because kneading held the future steady, and I feel her presence in my wrists. I have been nearly written over, and I wrote back. That is the quiet victory that keeps me warm. There is a last thing I want to hand you, as if passing a small, practical amulet. Keep a list of names. Keep the numbers of people who know how to read a bank statement. Keep a lawyer's card taped into a cookbook. Teach a child to read the signatures on envelopes and to notice when handwriting wobbles. Teach them to see the difference between a kindness that asks and a kindness that decides. Mostly, keep your voice. You would be amazed at how often we forget that what is ours to say belongs to us forever. The porch light hums like an old friend when I go to bed. I stand a little at the window and look out at the street that knows the sound of my footsteps. Sometimes Mateo walks by and looks up. Sometimes he does not. That is his choosing. I am learning to tend the small garden inside my chest where forgiveness might one day grow. Until then, I water the plants of myself. I keep my name on the mailbox. I keep the jar of coins in the bedroom, and, when the nights are quiet, I tuck a small thank you note into the top because gratitude is a thing you repay yourself with. At last, if this were a song, it would not be loud. It would be the single note a violin holds when the rest of the orchestra hushes. It would be the breath between two storms. I stand on my small porch. The swing holds my shape. The kettle has cooled, and I am still here. I was almost made into a slideshow about someone else's idea of me. I opened the laptop, I watched their music for a breath, and then I turned it off. I did not shout. I did not break. I called a lawyer. I called my grandson. I kept my will to my name, and when the court of ordinary life asked me to step, I stepped into the light that was always mine. The world will always be full of people who try to write endings for others. Some do it with grand design. Some do it with the slow suffocation of small conveniences. But there is a more ancient thing than their cunning, the stubbornness of a life that will not be catalogued, while it still breathes. That stubbornness is for sale at no price. It is given in the small choices you make each morning, thread by thread, meal by meal, prayer by prayer. If you remember anything of my telling, remember this: never let anyone choose your music before you have had a chance to sing. The night folds itself around the house like an old shawl. I turn off the porch light. The jasmine remembers to breathe. The moon makes a small coin of light on the step. I press my palm flat against the wood, my wood end say the name I learned as a child in a kitchen far away. Josephine. The house knows my hand. The swing knows my weight. The kettle is chipped and will be fine. I close my eyes, and the last thing I tell the darkness before sleep is not a request nor a regret, but a clarity. I was almost erased, and I was not. I am still here. I am the keeper of my own days. I am the one who decides the music. And with that, I breathe and sleep, and the world keeps watch.